The grand library of the Galactic Concordance stretched across 17 levels of pure white stone and floating crystal platforms that hummed with ancient energy. And within its endless halls walked a young Valorian scholar named Kethra, who had spent the last 3 years studying the behavioral patterns of lesser species. Across the known galaxy, her pale blue skin glowed softly in the dim light as she moved between the towering shelves of data crystals, her 4 delicate fingers dancing across holographic indexes that responded to her touch with streams of information in 100 different languages. Kethra considered herself an expert on alien psychology, and she had written papers on the aggressive territorial displays of the Krethal warriors and the complex social deception practiced by the Menthari traders. But today she had stumbled upon something that made no sense at all deep within the interspecies behavioral codex, buried under layers of security clearances that she had spent months earning. She found an entry that carried the highest possible priority flag, a warning so severe that it was marked with the same level of danger as a supernova or a black hole emergence. The entry concerned Humans. Kethra let out a soft chirp of confusion as she read the warning again and again, certain that she must be misunderstanding the ancient text somehow. The warning stated that if any non-human personnel heard a human speak certain phrases, they were required by Concordance law to immediately evacuate the area without hesitation or delay. The phrases included such strange human expressions as "now I am really annoyed and fine. We will do this the hard way, and I am done being nice about this." Kethra could not believe what she was reading, and she pulled up everything the library had on human physiology to remind herself what she was dealing with. Humans were small creatures from a mid-sized planet called Earth in an unremarkable solar system on the outer edge of the galaxy, and they possessed no natural armor or protective scales of any kind. They had no venom or poison glands, no claws worth mentioning, no ability to regenerate lost limbs, and no psychic capabilities whatsoever. Their bones were fragile compared to most species, and their skin could be cut by something as simple as a sharp piece of metal or glass. They lived barely 100 years, which meant that a human elder was still younger than a Valorian adolescent, and they required constant intake of food and water, and a full third of their short lives spent in an unconscious state they called sleep by every objective measure. Humans were one of the weakest sentient species in the galaxy, and yet here was an official Concordance warning treating them like they were more dangerous than a Krethal War fleet. Kethra gathered the data crystals containing her discovery and made her way to the council chamber at the top of the library, where the eldest scholars spent their days debating matters of galactic importance. She was young and had no right to demand an audience with the Council of Elders, but the mystery burning in her mind would not let her rest until she had answers. The council chamber was a vast circular room with seats carved from a single piece of crystal that had taken 1,000 years to shape, and around the great table sat 7 of the oldest and wisest beings in Valorian society. Kethra bowed low and presented her findings, expecting the elders to laugh at the obvious error in the ancient records, but no laughter came. Instead, a heavy silence fell over the chamber, and Kethra watched as the elders exchanged looks that she had never seen on their faces. The 4 looks of genuine fear. The eldest among them was a Thrixian named Verl, who had lived for over 400 years and had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy, and his bioluminescent skin, which normally glowed with warm golden light, began to dim until it was almost completely black. This was a sign of deep distress among his people, and Kethra felt her confidence waver as she realized that something was very wrong. Vor raised one of his 6 arms and dismissed the other junior members from the chamber with a gesture that allowed no argument, and soon only Kethra remained standing before the ancient counselor. "You wish to know why we fear that phrase," Verl said, and his voice was like the rumble of distant thunder across an empty plain. Kethra nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Then you must understand what happened at Kalos Station," Verl continued. And he activated a holographic display that showed an image of a massive space station floating in the darkness between stars. Kalos Station was a trading hub on the edge of civilized space, a place where the laws of the Concordance held little power and where criminals and merchants and smugglers gathered to conduct business away from the eyes of authority. Kethra had heard of such places, though she had never visited one herself. 60 years ago, a human came to Kalos Station, Verl said, and the holographic display shifted to show an image of an unremarkable human male with brown skin and dark hair and eyes that seemed tired but kind. His name was Marcus Chun, and he was a freight hauler who transported goods between the outer colonies. A simple man with a simple job who wanted nothing more than to complete his work and return home. Verl paused, and his skin flickered with traces of that old fear. What happened to Marcus Chen at Kalos Station became a lesson that the Concordance has never forgotten, and it is the reason why that warning exists in our most sacred archives. Kethra leaned forward, her curiosity overwhelming her nervousness. "What did the human do?" she asked at Vol's eyes. Ancient and weary, met hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "He got annoyed," Verl said simply. "And then he taught the entire galaxy why that is the most dangerous thing a human can do." The holographic display began to play a recording, and Kethra watched as the story of Marcus Chun unfolded before her eyes, showing her a truth about humans that would change her understanding of the galaxy forever. The recording showed Kalos Station as it had been 60 years ago, a sprawling maze of metal corridors and crowded marketplaces, where dozens of different species pushed and shoved their way through the chaos of daily commerce. Marcus Chun had arrived on the station 3 weeks before the events that would make him famous, and he had come with a simple purpose that should have taken no more than a few days to resolve. His cargo ship, a modest vessel named the Sarah Jane after his late wife, had been seized by the Dreth Syndicate upon his arrival at the station, and his cargo of medical supplies destined for a colony world had been confiscated. Under claims of fraudulent customs violations, Marcus knew the claims were false because he had filled out every form correctly and paid every fee on time. But the Dreth Syndicate controlled the customs office on Kalos Station, and they had decided that his cargo now belonged to them. On his first day dealing with the situation, Marcus went to the customs office and waited in line for 9 hours without complaint. The aliens around him watched with mild curiosity as the human stood perfectly still in the queue, not fidgeting or sighing or showing any signs of the frustration that would have overwhelmed most species after the first hour when he finally reached the front of the line. The bureaucrat behind the counter was a Minthari with scales, the color of rust, who barely looked at Marcus before telling him that his appeal had been denied and he would need to file a new form and return. Tomorrow Marcus thanked the bureaucrat politely and left without argument. The next day he returned and waited 11 hours in a different line, only to be told that he had filled out the wrong form and would need to start the process again from the beginning. Marcus thanked this new bureaucrat as well and asked which form he should use instead on the third day. He waited 14 hours and was told that the office handling his case had been closed permanently and he would need to take his complaint to a different department on the other side of the station. Marcus walked for 2 hours to reach the new department and found that it had also been closed, with a small sign directing him to yet another office that turned out to not exist at all. A Valorian merchant named Trell had been watching the human with growing fascination, and he approached Marcus in a corridor to ask why he had not simply given up and purchased new cargo elsewhere. "Because the cargo is not mine to abandon," Marcus explained with a tired but patient smile. "Those medical supplies were purchased by a colony that has been waiting for them for months. And there are sick people counting on me to deliver what I promised. Trell found this answer confusing because no reasonable being would endure such treatment for the sake of strangers. But he nodded politely and wished the human luck days turned into weeks. And Marcus Chun became something of a curiosity on Kalos Station. He slept only a few hours each night in a cheap lodging house near the docks. And he spent every waking moment navigating the corrupt bureaucracy with a patience that seemed impossible. He spoke calmly to 17 different bureaucrats and filed 23 different forms and made 18 official appeals. And through it all, he never once raised his voice or made a threat or showed any sign of anger. The various alien species on the station began placing wagers on when the human would finally break. A group of Krethal warriors bet that he would explode into violence within the next 2 days, because that was what they would have done long ago. A Minthari gambling den offered odds on whether he would simply collapse from exhaustion and despair, because surely no mind could endure such constant frustration without cracking. But Marcus did not break, and he did not collapse. And each morning, he appeared at whatever office he needed to visit with the same tired but determined expression on his face. Then Vorgan got involved. Vorgan was the leader of the Dreth Syndicate, a massive Krethal who stood nearly 3 meters tall and whose scales were covered with the ritual scars of 100 victories in combat. He had heard about the persistent human who refused to accept that his cargo was gone, and he found the situation amusing at first. But as the days passed and Marcus continued to file appeals and gather evidence and speak to anyone who would listen, Vorgan began to see the human as an irritation that needed to be removed. He sent a message to Marcus offering to return the cargo for triple its value in credits. Certain that the human would accept this generous offer and disappear, Marcus politely declined, explaining that he did not have triple the value and that the cargo had been wrongfully taken and should be returned without any payment. Vorgan was not used to being refused, and his amusement turned to annoyance. He sent thugs to rough up the human and convince him to leave the station. But Marcus simply patched up his wounds and returned to the customs office the next morning as if nothing had happened. Now Vorgan was angry, and when a Krethal crime lord became angry, people usually died. But Vorgan did not want to simply kill the human, because that would create paperwork and might attract the attention of the Concordance authorities, who occasionally patrolled this region of space. Instead, he decided to break the human spirit in a way that would make him leave voluntarily. Late one night, while Marcus was sleeping in his tiny rented room, Vorgan's agents set fire to the lodging house. Marcus escaped with his life, but nothing else, and he stood in the ashes of the building as emergency crews arrived to contain the blaze. Other residents had also lost their belongings, but Marcus had lost something that could never be replaced: a small photograph of his wife Sarah, the only image he had left of her after she had died of illness 3 years before. He had carried that photograph across the galaxy for years, keeping it close to his heart as a reminder of the woman he had loved and lost, and now it was gone, burned to ash by criminals who had decided that their greed was more important than his grief. A crowd gathered to watch the human standing motionless in the smoking ruins, and they expected to see him weep or scream or finally surrender to the despair that any reasonable being would feel. But Marcus did not weep, and he did not scream. He simply stood there in perfect stillness for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the dying flames. Then he took a slow breath and spoke 5 words in a voice so quiet that only those closest to him could hear. "Now I am really annoyed." The older merchants in the crowd, those who had dealt with humans before, turned pale and began running for the exits. The younger ones who remained would soon learn why. In the days that followed the fire, something changed in Marcus Chun that the aliens of Kalos Station could not quite understand. He still spoke politely to everyone he met, and he still filed paperwork at the customs office with the same methodical patience he had shown before. But there was something different in his eyes, now a cold focus that made even the most hardened criminals feel uncomfortable when they looked at him. Translator implants that converted his words into the languages of other species could not convey this change. And so most of the station's inhabitants did not realize what was happening until it was far too late. Vorgan certainly did not realize it. And he laughed when his informants told him that the human was still pursuing his hopeless appeals. Let the soft creature waste his remaining days, Vorgan growled to his lieutenants. He will grow tired eventually and crawl away to die somewhere, and we will never have to think about him again. But Marcus was not wasting his days, and he had no intention of crawling away in the 6 days after the fire. Marcus Chen did not sleep for more than 2 hours at a time, and he spent every waking moment learning everything there was to know about Kalos Station. He learned where the power conduits ran through the walls and which ones were connected to which sections of the station, learned which maintenance tunnels were used by smugglers, and which ones were forgotten and abandoned. He learned the names of every official who had ever taken a bribe from the Dreth Syndicate, and exactly how much they had been paid. He learned the secrets that people whispered in dark corners when they thought no one was listening, because humans had a talent for being overlooked and ignored that other species did not possess. And most importantly, he learned the weaknesses. Every system has weaknesses if you look hard enough. And Marcus looked very hard. Indeed, the Dreth Syndicate had been operating on Kalos Station for nearly 50 years. And in that time, they had grown lazy and careless in ways that a more careful observer would have noticed. Long ago, their financial records were stored on servers that had not been updated in decades, protected by security systems that a human child could have bypassed with basic tools. Their warehouses were filled with goods that had been stolen from 100 different ships, goods that the original owners would very much like to know. The location of their network of corrupt officials included several who had made enemies in the Concordance government, enemies who would be very interested to learn about certain illegal activities. Marcus gathered all of this information with the patience of a spider building a web, and when he was ready, he began to pull the threads. On the 7th day after the fire, the Concordance Tax Authority received an anonymous message containing detailed records of the Dreth Syndicate's hidden accounts, including 17 years of unpaid taxes and evidence of money laundering that violated a dozen interstellar treaties. The tax authority was not known for its speed, but even they could not ignore evidence this damning. And within hours, a team of investigators was on its way to Kalos Station. On the 8th day, 3 of the Syndicate's largest warehouses failed surprise safety inspections conducted by officials who had suddenly become very concerned about fire suppression systems and emergency exits. Officials had received anonymous tips about the unsafe conditions, along with gentle reminders about certain personal matters that they would prefer to keep private. The warehouses were condemned and their contents seized pending investigation. On the 9th day, witnesses in 4 separate criminal cases involving the Dreth Syndicate suddenly found the courage to testify against their former employers. These witnesses had been silent for years out of fear, but someone had contacted them and promised protection and offered evidence that the Syndicate was weaker than they believed. On the 10th day, Vorgan discovered that his most trusted lieutenant had been skimming profits for the past 3 years. A betrayal revealed by financial records that had been anonymously delivered to Vorgan's personal terminal. The lieutenant insisted that he had been framed, but Vorgan did not believe in coincidences, and the resulting violence weakened the Syndicate's leadership at exactly the wrong moment. Through all of this, Marcus continued to visit the customs office each day and file his paperwork as if nothing unusual was happening. The bureaucrats who had tormented him for weeks began to look at him differently. wondering if perhaps they had made a mistake in refusing his simple requests. Some of them quietly began processing his appeals with sudden efficiency, hoping that giving him what he wanted would make the strange human go away before whatever he was doing affected them. Personnel of Vorgan was not stupid, and by the 11th day he had realized that the human was somehow responsible for the disasters befalling his organization. He gathered his remaining loyal soldiers and sent a team of 6 assassins to eliminate the pest once and for all. Assassins found Marcus in a maintenance corridor late at night, and they expected an easy kill 6 trained warriors against 1 small human with no weapons and no armor. What they did not expect was for the human to be ready, for Marcus had known they were coming, because he had been monitoring Syndicate communications for days, and he had chosen this corridor specifically because of what it contained when the assassins attacked. Marcus grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed it directly into the face of the first attacker, blinding him with freezing chemicals before the others could react. Marcus had broken a support strut from the ceiling and was using it as a weapon with a brutal efficiency that the assassins had never seen from a human. Before the fight lasted less than 2 minutes, and when it was over, Marcus stood alone among the bodies of his attackers, breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. He had not wanted to kill anyone, but humans had a saying about self-defense that the assassins had failed to consider before. Accepting their mission, Marcus dragged the bodies to a waste disposal unit and then returned to his temporary shelter to rest for a few hours before the customs office opened. But now, for the first time since the fire, he allowed himself to smile. The next morning, he filed his usual paperwork, and the bureaucrat behind the counter noticed that smile and felt a chill run down his spine that he could not explain. Something terrible was coming, and everyone on Kalos Station was beginning to realize that the small human in the worn clothing was somehow at the center of it. Word spread through Kalos Station like fire through dry grass, and soon everyone knew that the Dreth Syndicate was under attack by forces they could not see or understand. Merchants who had paid protection money for years began to wonder if perhaps they had been paying the wrong people, and criminals who had worked with Vorgan started looking for ways to distance themselves from his failing organization. The other factions on the station, the Manthari traders, the independent smugglers, the legitimate businesses that operated in the shadows of the criminal enterprises, all watched with growing interest as the most powerful organization on the station crumbled from within. And at the center of it all was a single human who filed paperwork during the day and dismantled empires during the night. Vorgan had never known fear in his long life of violence and conquest, but he was beginning to understand it now. Every move he made seemed to backfire. Every ally he called upon had excuses for why they could not help, and every secret he had kept for decades was suddenly exposed to exactly the wrong people. His lieutenants whispered that the station itself had turned against them, that some angry spirit was punishing them for their crimes. But Vorgan knew better. He knew that spirits did not file customs appeals or smile politely at bureaucrats. On the 14th day since the fire, Vorgan decided that enough was enough. If subtlety had failed to stop the human, then overwhelming force would have to suffice. And Vorgan did not care any more about attracting attention from the Concordance authorities. He called in every favor he had accumulated over 50 years of criminal enterprise. And by midday he had assembled a force of 40 armed Krethal warriors in the station's central plaza. These were not ordinary thugs, but trained soldiers, each one standing over 2 meters tall with scales like armor and muscles that could tear through metal. They carried plasma rifles and vibroblades and wore expressions of eager anticipation, because Krethal warriors lived for combat, and they had been promised a worthy opponent. Vorgan had his communications team broadcast the gathering across the entire station, making sure that everyone would see what happened to those who challenged the Dreth Syndicate. The message was simple. The human called Marcus Chen was ordered to present himself in the central plaza within 1 hour, or the syndicate would begin executing hostages taken from the businesses that had stopped paying protection. Money was a brutal and direct approach, the kind of approach that Vorgan should have used from the beginning instead of playing games with a creature. He did not understand Marcus Chun arrived in the plaza with 10 minutes to spare, walking calmly through the crowd of onlookers who had gathered to watch the spectacle. He was bruised and tired after 2 weeks of sleeping in maintenance closets and fighting for his life. And he carried no visible weapons. The only thing in his hands was a small data pad that glowed softly in the artificial light of the station. Vorgan stepped forward to meet him, towering over the human like a mountain over a pebble, and his scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. So the pest finally shows himself, Vorgan growled, and his voice echoed through the plaza for all to hear. I must admit, human, you have caused me more trouble than I expected from such a small and fragile creature. Marcus looked up at the crime lord without flinching, and his voice was calm when he spoke. You could have avoided all of this trouble by simply returning my cargo and apologizing for the inconvenience. Laughter rippled through the assembled warriors, though a few of the older ones noticed that their leader was not laughing. You stand before 40 of my best soldiers, Vorgan said, armed with nothing but a data pad, and you still speak of apologies. Tell me, human, are all your kind this foolish, or are you simply broken in the head? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the plaza with perfect clarity. You burned my wife's picture. The laughter stopped. I was already having a bad month when I arrived at this station. Marcus continued. My ship needed repairs I could not afford, and I had been flying alone for 3 years since Sarah died, and I was tired in ways that I cannot even describe. He took a step forward, and something in his posture made several of the warriors take an involuntary step back. But I tried to handle this the right way. I asked nicely. I followed your rules. I waited in your lines and filed your forms, and treated everyone with respect, even when they did not deserve it. His eyes locked onto Vorgan's, and the crime lord felt a chill that he had never experienced before. And you burned the last piece of her I had left. Marcus held up the data pad, and its screen displayed a detailed schematic of Kalos, station with 17 locations marked in flashing red. I have spent 2 weeks mapping every structural weakness in this station, he said. Every oxygen line, every power coupling, every emergency bulkhead with a faulty seal. I know which systems are redundant and which ones are critical. And I know exactly what would happen if certain components experienced sudden and catastrophic failure. The crowd began to murmur, and some of the smarter observers started moving toward the exits. 17 points of failure, Marcus continued. 17 ways to cripple this station without destroying it completely. Not enough to kill everyone, but enough to make life very difficult for anyone who remains. Vorgan's confidence wavered for the first time, and his warriors exchanged nervous glances. You are bluffing, Vorgan said, but his voice lacked its former certainty. Am I? Marcus asked, and he pressed a button on the data pad. The lights throughout the station flickered once, twice, 3 times, and then stabilized, but the message was clear. That was me accessing the station's power grid, Marcus said. I have not done anything yet, but I could. And I want you to understand something very important before you make your next decision. He dropped the data pad on the ground, leaving himself completely unarmed. I am not trapped in here with you. You are trapped in here with me. And I am really annoyed. The silence that followed was absolute. Vorgan looked at the human standing before him, small and fragile and utterly without fear, and for the first time in his life, The great crime lord did not know what to do. His warriors looked to him for orders. But Vorgan's lieutenants were already backing away, their survival instincts overriding their loyalty. Then Marcus smiled, and Vorgan understood that he had already lost. What happened next would later be classified by the Concordance as a localized infrastructure cascade. Those survivors would describe it in much more colorful terms for years to come. The holographic recording flickered and died, leaving Kethra standing in the dim light of the council chamber with her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. She had seen the chaos that erupted in the plaza when Marcus triggered his sabotage, the emergency bulkhead slamming shut to trap Vorgan's warriors in sections with failing life support, the artificial gravity fluctuating wildly to throw the Krethal soldiers off balance, the station's automated defense systems suddenly identifying Syndicate members as hostile intruders. She had seen Marcus Chan walk through the chaos untouched, stepping over fallen warriors and ducking through closing doors with perfect timing, as if he had rehearsed every movement 1,000 times. She had seen Vorgan try to flee and fail, cornered at last by a human who weighed less than one of his arms, but who had somehow become the most dangerous creature on the station, and she had seen the end. When Marcus stood over the defeated crime lord and took the ceremonial insignia of office from Vorgan's neck, a symbol of power that the Krethales valued more than their own lives, he did not kill Vorgan. Kethra said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Vol confirmed. He left Vorgan alive, but stripped of everything that mattered: his organization, his reputation, his honor. The human understood that for a Krethal, this was a fate far worse than death. Kethra shook her head in disbelief, her blue skin flickering with agitation. One human did all of that, brought down an entire criminal empire that had operated for 50 years. And he did it because of a photograph. Vor's ancient eyes studied her with something like sympathy. You still do not understand, child. And that is because you are focusing on the wrong part of the story. He rose from his seat and walked slowly toward a wall of the chamber that displayed the official seal of the Galactic Concordance. The remarkable thing is not what Marcus Chun accomplished. The remarkable thing is that Marcus Chun was not remarkable at all. Kethra's confusion deepened. He was a freight hauler, Verl continued. A simple man who transported cargo between colony worlds. He had no military training, no special education, no unusual abilities of any kind by human standards. He was completely ordinary. The old Thrixion turned to face her, and his bioluminescent skin pulsed with colors that Kethra had never seen. The 4 colors that her people used only when discussing matters of grave importance. Do you understand what that means? It means that any human could have done what Marcus Chun did. That every human carries within them the same capacity for patient, methodical, devastating retribution. He pulled up more records on the holographic display, and Kethra saw hundreds of similar incidents cataloged across the galaxy. A human botanist whose research samples were stolen by pirates. She spent 2 years tracking down every ship in the pirate fleet, learning their routes and their weaknesses, and when she was finished, the fleet no longer existed. A human chef whose restaurant was destroyed by corporate sabotage over an unpaid invoice. He systematically exposed the corporation's illegal activities to regulators on 17 different worlds until the company collapsed into bankruptcy. A human child, barely 12 years old, whose pet dog was killed by a cruel neighbor. On a space station, she taught herself to program and spent 6 months learning the station's computer systems before reprogramming the entire AI network to make the neighbor's life a waking nightmare of small but constant inconveniences. Humans have a concept they call the last straw, Vorl explained. Their language is full of such expressions. the straw that broke the camel's back. The final nail in the coffin, the point of no return. They understand, in a way that other species do not, that patience has limits. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Most species respond to frustration and injustice with immediate action. The Krathiel attack, the Minthari scheme, the Valorians retreat and regroup, but humans are different. And this difference is what makes them so dangerous. They will tolerate almost anything, Varl said. They will absorb abuse and frustration and injustice with a calm that seems impossible, smiling and nodding and filing paperwork while the universe treats them unfairly. Other species see this and assume that humans are weak, that their patience is a sign of submission. His skin darkened to near black again, but somewhere inside every human is a line, and they themselves often do not know where it is until it has been crossed. When that line is crossed, something changes in them. Something fundamental shifts in how they see the world and their place in it. They stop trying to resolve things peacefully. Varl continued. They stop following the rules that others have set, and they start making their own rules, and every ounce of that famous human endurance, every bit of their creativity and stubbornness and refusal to surrender, becomes focused on a single purpose, making the problem go away, Kethra whispered. Understanding beginning to dawn, permanently, Varl agreed. He gestured. And the holographic display showed the official Concordance advisory that was now taught to every spacefaring species in the galaxy. BHAVR RL alert human interaction. PRO tank so if a human states that they are really annoyed, or done or finished being nice, immediately cease all hostile action and offer sincere apology. Do not attempt negotiation once a human has reached this state. Do not attempt intimidation. Humans in this state do not respond to threats or deterrence. They respond only to total capitulation or total victory. There is no middle ground. Kithra read the advisory 3 times, and each time the words seemed to carry more weight. Marcus Chun delivered his cargo to the colony that was waiting for it, Varl said quietly. He never spoke of what happened at Kalos Station, never sought fame or recognition for what he had done, as far as he was concerned. He had simply corrected an injustice that should never have occurred in the first place. What happened to him after that? Kethra asked. He continued hauling freight for another 30 years until he retired to a small moon in the outer colonies. By all accounts, he lived a quiet and peaceful life, and he died in his sleep surrounded by friends at the age of 92. Varl deactivated the holographic display. He was a good man who wanted only to do his job and be left alone, and because others would not leave him alone, he destroyed them, and then he went back to being a good man. Kethra stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing everything she had learned. I think, she said finally, that I will choose a different thesis topic. Varl nodded slowly, a gesture of approval. That would be wise. Young scholar, there are some mysteries in this galaxy that are better left unstudied, and the patience of humans is one of them. Kethra bowed respectfully and turned to leave the council chamber, but she paused at the door with one final question. The phrase in the warning, has anyone ever heard a human say it and survived? Vor's skin flickered with what might have been dark humor. Only those who ran fast enough. Kethra left the Grand Library that day with a new understanding of the galaxy and the strange soft creatures who had somehow become one of its most feared species. And for the rest of her long life, whenever she met a human who seemed patient and kind and reasonable, she remembered the story of Marcus Chun and treated them with the respect that such dangerous beings deserved.